All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our weekly City of Toledo update. As always, I want to thank David and Desiree, our American Sign Language volunteers who are making sure that those who have difficulty hearing are able to participate and receive the information we're communicating today. Members of the media, again, as we do this every week, try to remain muted until I ask for questions. At that time, you can use the raise your hand function to alert our Zoom host, and we'll call on you when we get to the end. We have several different announcements today, a number of different topics. I'm going to try to go through them as quickly as I can. I know that is sometimes a challenge for me, but I will try my best to be brief because we have a lot we want to get through. Number of different topics. This is in no order of importance. I want to start with the budget. We are about a week away from our first reevaluation of our TELs, or the employees we had to place on temporary emergency leave. We said we do that every 30 days. 30 days is May 15th, so that's not tomorrow, it's next Friday. So we don't have anything to announce today, but I wanted to sort of, put a little post-it note in your file that that's coming up next week, and we'll be able to provide an update. There is the possibility of some good news coming from Columbus. I know I talked about this last night on my Wednesdays with Wade, but I want to talk a little more clearly about it right now. I know there's a number of different pots of money and it's confusing for everyone, but if you can remember about 5 or 6 weeks ago when Congress passed what they're calling CARES 3.0. The CARES 3.0 package was a package of relief distributed to the different states of this country. It is the bill that appropriated aid based on the population size of a city. So Toledo and most other cities were left out when they decided to put a population guidepost on the relief. But for cities that weren't 500,000 citizens and larger, which in Ohio was only Columbus, and nationwide was only about 36 or 37 cities, aid was provided directly to state governments. And then cities like Toledo could apply to the state for their portion of CARES 3.0. That the amount of local government relief for the state of Ohio was $1.2 billion, and the state is now beginning its process of distributing that money. They are not going, the state has decided not to apportion all $1.2 billion at once. They will apportion it over the course of the next several months, but their first chunk, for lack of a better phrase, is a $350 million package to distribute the first $350 million of what will be over $1 billion local relief. This took the form yesterday of a bill called Senate Bill 310. It was introduced in the Senate. It passed the Senate. Now it's on the way to the House. Were it to pass, as I anticipate that it will, it would distribute money to local governments in Ohio according to the formula of the local government fund. And for the city of Toledo, that would be just over $8 million. Most importantly, they have loosened the strings on how that money can be spent. And now it is permissible to use this money from Senate Bill 310. Again, were it to pass in its current form and not get amended today, that money could be used to pay salaries of police and firefighters. So we certainly hope Senate Bill 310 passes. That will not get us out of the mess we're in, of course, but that would be a wonderful and welcome first step in a long process. And since there would be the flexibility to use those resources to pay salaries of police and fire, that would be very helpful as we try to get through the situation that we are in right now. That will not be that $8 million. Again, I hope that'll be passed by the legislature if everything goes right by the end of this week. That is not going to be the only or the last and only relief that we would receive through CARES 3.0. The state would still have the remaining, whatever 1.2 billion minus 350 million is, I probably should know that, but there would still be hundreds of millions of dollars specifically earmarked for local relief that would come afterwards. We don't know the formula that they would use for the additional money, but were they to use the formula that they used in Senate Bill 310, you know, this is back of the envelope rough math here. The city of Toledo could see itself getting 23 million dollars by the time CARES 3.0 is distributed. That would be helpful, and we are engaged every day, or at least I am every day, with the folks in our state government to make sure that Toledo receives the assistance it deserves as part of what we are going through as a country. So that is, I start with a little bit of good news there. Congress, by the end of this month, will be back in full session in Washington, and there is going to on the frustrating journey that we're on right now that could provide relief to Toledo. So there's been a lot of talk about the size of our budget hole, and it's significant. And right now, all we have been able to do is cut, and goodness knows that we have cut with our TELs and just any one of a number of projects that we were going to do, but decided not to at this time. General across the board percentage-based department reductions, all of those things we have been doing. But it's not necessarily the case that we will get out of this budget mess with nothing other than cuts. True, cuts are essentially all we can do right now, but we will get out of this budget hole with some revenue, new revenue, in the form of CARES 3.0 dollars, CARES 4.0 dollars, and the first 8 million of that appears to be on its way. Knock on wood, make sure the state legislature doesn't change a good bill by the time it gets passed. So it won't all be cuts. It's going to be a mixture of cuts and new revenue, like the 8 million we are anticipating here shortly. But when you add up both sides of the ledger, we know we have work to do, but this, is the beginning of what I hope can be some good news on the budget front. Last thing I suppose I'll say about the budget is that we continue to work with City Council. We understand that we are going to need to introduce and have council pass a new budget. The budget we passed for 2020 passed literally a week before the economy imploded, and things are much different now than they were when the budget passed in March. So we're hoping that maybe by June we'll be in a position to introduce and pass a revised 2020 budget that takes into account the new world in which we live. We're going to continue to work with City Council on that. Today, I can announce that there will be a 25 officer police class that will begin in October. That was something that City Council established as a priority. I think special there should be special recognition to the role that Katie Moline and Chris Delaney played in identifying funds to make that possible. And then the final part of the funding solution came from Matt Cherry, and an amendment and an idea he had the other day. So it's a great partnership. Councilwoman Moline and Councilman Delaney and Cherry, each in their own way, kind of built a plan that provided the funding. But at the end of the day, under our system, only the chief and I could decide whether there would be a class and whether the logistics and timing could come together in the unique situation we're in. But I've had enough time to talk to the chief and the safety director, and we feel comfortable that starting in October, we can have a class of 25 officers that will replace the roughly 25 officers that we think will be retiring this year. So that is an example of a collaboration we've done with City Council. And though there are, though today is probably not quite the time to get into some of the other areas or projects that we need to work with City Council on, I might simply tease them right now by saying that, again, we passed a budget in March. We understand a new revised budget is going to be needed here in the next month or so. There are a number of projects in the pipeline, and this has been the source of my conversation with members of council this week. There are a number of projects that were in the pipeline, in the queue, that were part of the budget we passed earlier this year when the world was different. And frankly, projects that we have already spent a decent amount of taxpayer money on, anticipating that we'd be able to go forward to completion, that now in a changed budget environment has caused me to reflect on whether it's wise to continue to go all the way through. So we're going to have to work with council to try to figure some of these things out. Again, I'm talking about projects that probably wouldn't have been proposed or introduced or funded at all, starting now. Some of these things we wouldn't have decided to do if we knew what the world looked like. But the fact of the matter is we started them before the world changed and spent a lot of money to make them happen. And so now we have to sort of make a decision about whether we, postpone some projects, cast some to the side, or say to ourselves, boy, we've already invested so much money, it would be actually foolish to not go forward and finish it. Or there's one case of some fire department equipment that we got a $700,000 grant for, but it still requires a $200,000 local match. Again, when we had record low unemployment and a budget surplus a couple months ago, that was an easy call. Now that's something we're gonna have to talk to council about. I can understand there might be reticence to spend even $200,000 on anything, even something as important as equipment for the fire department. So maybe we don't want to do that, but yet do we really want to give $700,000 back to the federal government? LED lights is another issue that is on my mind that I've begun to talk to council about. Some of you members of the media who were there will remember in January, we had a great news conference over at the Frederick Douglass Community Center, where we celebrated this partnership and agreement that we had spent, 9 months to a year negotiating with First Energy to transfer out, to convert the 28,000 old gas vapor lights on the 28,000 light poles we have in Toledo into new, more efficient LED lights. This is something that was going to save Toledo money long-term, because the lights only need to be replaced, not every 20 years, but maybe every 15 to 20 years, as opposed to the current lights, which have to be switched out, every 3 or 4 years. So it's a big money saver. But really, I think the reason there was so much excitement around LED lights was because of what it would do to safety in our neighborhoods. The one neighborhood where we did a pilot project on LED lights, the old South End, saw it was over 20%, I believe 21% reduction in violent crime right after LED lights were installed in that neighborhood. And so there's a real belief that making sure every light post in our city has a bright LED light in it isn't something that would save us money long-term only, but that it would also provide real tangible safety, a public safety result in our neighborhoods. Frankly, that's something I think we should still move forward on, but I am respectful of the fact that City Council potentially might disagree. There is a local, the city was responsible for a local match in that partnership with First Energy. I think we should move forward. I think this is in the interest of public safety. It's a crucial program to move on. But again, we are in different times, different budget times. And I can respect that there could be those in City Council who would disagree and believe that it's not time to spend money on LED lights and that we should stick it out, under the old burned out lights for, a certain period of time. So I've got, and there are other issues like that. I've probably lingered on that. Time and treasure into implementing them. There's a little more treasure that would need to be committed to these necessarily would have been proposed today had we known what the world was going to look like, but they were proposed several months and maybe even upwards of a year ago if we're talking about the LED lights, but they're just not done yet. So do we discard them totally, or do we reach some sort of a compromise? At any rate, that's where we are in the budget, and look forward to continuing to work with council to establish joint priorities to help the city move forward. I want to talk next about summertime gatherings, two very specific things that are an important part of summer in Toledo. People look forward to. Unfortunately, we're going to announce today that we're not going to be able to do these things for our citizens, and I'm specifically talking about city pools and fireworks. I think maybe starting with fireworks, I think people could see the handwriting on the wall a while ago on this one. Even as the governor continues to open up the state, open up the economy, open up society, it's happening very slowly. And he has been pretty clear that the large gatherings of people will be the last things to go back to normal. And the notion of having tens of thousands of people jammed close to one another down on the riverfront watching fireworks is just not something that the governor is going to allow, and I completely understand that. And I think when you saw ProMedica yesterday announce that the concert series was canceled, I think I saw a couple days ago that Sylvania Centennial Terrace canceled their large gatherings. It's pretty, other cities around the state, frankly, have already made this decision long ago. We held out as long as we could because we know how important 4th of July fireworks are to this community. Frankly, we even played around with the idea of, was there some way to do it, maybe with citizens in their cars, and it logistically, it would just couldn't happen. The traffic bottlenecks, it was impractical. So in consultation with our sponsors, the other major corporate sponsors who help fund the fireworks every year, say we regret to make the unfortunate, though I think probably anticipated announcement that we're not going to be able to have 4th of July fireworks this year. Along those same lines, the pools, the 6 pools and the splash pad at Savage Park will not be able to open this year. And I want to emphasize something very clearly. This is not a budget decision. Yes, we have budget challenges, but this decision was not made on budget at all. This is something that is necessitated by the health crisis we're facing. Other cities are doing this. I noticed even yesterday, Pemberville, a little Wood County community not far from Toledo, they are closing their city pools. And they're a very different community than Toledo in a lot of ways, but they are a city in the same state with the same governor and health director who understandably and correctly are putting a high priority on limiting activities that bring people in close contact with one another. And so as Pemberville did yesterday, today we are announcing that we're just not going to be able to provide that service to our citizens and our children. And it is heartbreaking to me personally. And I know that people who rely on that for enjoyment and fun and socialization, this is just one of these things that this year I'm not a science expert here, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but there is something about chlorine that the problem with the virus isn't related to what happens in the pool. The worry was when they get out of the pool and they're running around, playing and interacting in the changing rooms, when they're, putting their bathing suits on. I mean, it's that connection that worries the health experts. So very, very disappointed, but there's a lot of decisions like this that we're going to have to be making to protect our citizens. And, I hope that we will try to find a silver lining in this somehow and recommit ourselves to the sorts of activities that we can still do. I do want to point out, and not many people may know this, that traditionally, when our pools and splash pad are open, the City of Toledo provides lunches, free lunches for kids in the summer at these facilities. It's usually about, every day from late May to August, about 75 meals a day. Though the pools won't be open, we are going to continue to provide meals to children as we would typically do with our pools open. We're going to look for different locations, probably at city parks and elsewhere where we can provide these lunches and have them distributed in a socially distant, appropriate way, different pickup locations. So we're going to work through that. But I do want to emphasize that is a service we're going to continue to do. That you can do with respect to social distancing, splashing around, swimming, being in the locker room, putting on your bathing, that stuff, the health experts don't think we can do safely. So we're going to be guided by science, and we're going to follow their advice. The final thing I want to touch on are the governor's orders and the local enforcement of those orders. You may recall last week at this news conference, I talked about conversations we had with the health department and whether there was a local, whether there was an opportunity for local jurisdictions like Toledo and Lucas County Health Department to sort of put its imprint on the governor's orders, especially at a time starting May 12th. That's, I think, the day that we're going to see a change in terms of people starting to come out and interact and participate in commerce in a way that we haven't had before, because that's the day I think everyone knows that retail is going to come back online. In anticipation of that date, we have huddled with the health department health officials to come up sort of with a game plan on how we are going to locally enforce this. And so I want to say that we are doing a number of things. It is important, even as citizens are allowed to participate in retail starting May 12th. The governor still made it clear that there are still guidelines that have to be followed. This isn't, we're not going back to how things were right like that. This is going to be a slow, deliberate process, and there are still a number of requirements that businesses and citizens will have to follow if they want to be able to go to Kohl's and make a purchase or shop at that establishment come May 12th. There are so many of them that it would be wasteful to try to read them off the governor's list here, but businesses are required to post signage that talks very specifically about the need for social distancing, keeping customers 6 feet apart, etc. Their businesses need to keep customers 6 feet apart, and that's a requirement, not a polite recommendation. Employers must make sure that their employees are wearing face coverings. And it is not required that customers do, but employees must. There are steps that businesses must take to not only maintain social distancing, but to make sure that the total capacity of individuals in their store is at 50% of the fire code. And again, there's a number of things that are part of the governor's order. It falls on us, though, to enforce that. So how are we going to do it? Even before we got to the moment we are now, where we are reopening the economy, we have needed to enforce previous parts of the governor's order. We have had to enforce questions of which business is essential, which business isn't essential. And of course, citizens, employees, and others have called into the hotline and reported examples of what they felt was a non-essential business opening and trying to get around the governor's orders. There were about 100 businesses that we closed, even before we got to this moment, for violating the governor's order. We anticipate that there will be even more scrutiny and more attempts to get around the governor's order now that we are opening the economy even more. So all along, we have had one Toledo police officer assigned to enforcement. I think we are moving in a direction where we're going to assign more officers. Perhaps we might even triple it to 3. But instead of having one assigned officer over enforcement, we might now have 3 specific officers who do nothing other than make sure that complaints regarding violations of the governor's order are processed. Again, 419-213-4161 is the number that citizens must call if they see a violation occurring, and that's whether you are an employee and you think your employer is trying to get around the order, or whether you're a customer and, for instance, you don't see people 6 feet apart. That's the number you call. You press 4, you leave a message. Our Toledo police officers, again, now there's just one, there will be others assigned to this task, will take that complaint and then turn it over essentially to we're calling it a retail strike team of city officials, health officials, and Toledo police officers who will then investigate those complaints. More than that, that team, the strike team, will make unannounced random checks of retail establishments starting May 12th. Not necessarily governed by a complaint, but just random spot checks. In any case, whether the strike team shows up at a retail location as part of a random spot check, or whether a member of the strike team shows up at a business as the result of a complaint called into 213-4161, when a member of the strike force gets there, if he or she sees evidence that the governor's orders are being violated, and if the retail establishment cannot provide evidence that he or she is complying with the governor's order, then that business will be shut down. It'll be shut down right then and there that day. No warning letter. No, we'll come back tomorrow and, you better have, fixed this problem. Right then and there, we will immediately take action to make sure that the safety of our citizens is being protected. So that's how we're going to handle what we anticipate will be an influx of non-compliance complaints that will start to come in after May 12th. There is been a lot of attention in this country, I think, over the last couple of weeks about the debate over whether to open, how to open, what restrictions should be in place as we reopen. I think everyone has seen the protests up in Lansing and elsewhere around the country. And it's a good, healthy debate that, there's room for that debate in our country. Lost in some of that coverage is the fact that 65% of Americans are still scared and are afraid that the world is being reopened too quickly. Gallup comes up with a poll every day at noon. Other pollsters and folks who gauge public opinion put the percentage in roughly the same area. Somewhere between 3/5 and 2/3 of Americans are worried that we're going back to normal too quickly. Now, it's again, there's certainly room for debate on this. I don't think it's wrong to have things slowly reopen, but they need to reopen with strings attached, essentially. People are right to be fearful that if we merely go back to the Wild West that we were enjoying a couple months ago, then we'll be right back. We'll be right back at square one. And the second spike that everyone thinks is going to happen anyhow will be steeper than we want it to be. We live in a community where there have been 1,500 people who have come down with the virus. 147 have died. More people have died from this virus in Lucas County than in any of the other 87 counties in the state of Ohio. This is a big deal, and it's uniquely impacting our community in a negative way. Franklin County is a much bigger county. Cuyahoga County is a much bigger county. We've had more deaths in Lucas County than those large population centers. People want to be able to enjoy some of the freedoms that maybe we took for granted a couple months ago, and they should. And I think the governor has been smart in how he's done this. But even as we reopen, there are rules that have to be followed. And the overwhelming majority of the citizens of Toledo want those rules followed. They are afraid of what will happen if they aren't. We are taking that seriously, and so our strike team, our retail strike team, will make random spot checks. It will respond to complaints. It is being staffed up and beefed up, and there will be no warnings. There will be no letters. Establishments that are trying to get around the rules will be closed down. And I think that is the way to thread a very difficult needle here, and that's what our plan is. So with that, I think I'll maybe end by saying it's not only Public Service Recognition Week and National Drinking Water Week, it is also Nurses Week. Even before this year began, this was declared to be the year of the nurse. I think Florence Nightingale's 200th anniversary or 200th birthday is being recognized. And what a year of the nurse it has turned out to be. For us, certainly police, certainly fire, frankly, employees who work at grocery stores. You might not think of them in the same way as police and firefighters during this crisis. They are also putting their lives on the line, giving us the services and the goods that we need. But right there on that list are the nurses of this community, the nurses of this country. And I think it was unintended, though fitting, that 2020 was the year of the nurse, and boy has it been. So with that, thanks for bearing with me. I know I'm always a little more long-winded than I'd like to, but we had a lot we wanted to get through. And looking at my notes, I believe we got through it all. COVID-19 testing still happening at all of the sites that we've had. And I think I hit everything. So if there's any questions, we'll certainly open it up.
The first question, Mayor, is from Melissa Bates from Channel 13. Melissa?
She wants her coffee.
Good morning, Mayor. Thanks for having us. I have two questions. First of all is budgetary, and the second one is about our retail strike team. But the first one about budget, can you give me sort of a quick, what did our budget look like in March? Now, what are we looking at to kind of put it in perspective for people, do a compare and contrast to what we're seeing between March's budget and June's, how much you got to cut?
Yeah, well, what's really interesting is that so far as of yet, we have, in terms of actual receipts that have come in, actual tax collections that have come in, as of this moment, not only have we not seen a drop off, believe it or not, the first quarter of this year was better than we even forecasted to be. I think everyone knows when this year began, when 2020 began, we had record low unemployment. We had record high income tax collections, $191 million, the highest level of income tax collections the city had ever had. And we had a budget surplus. After the end of the first quarter, those numbers were stronger than we anticipated. That is because those numbers capture the world at the end of March. And the fact that we still haven't seen a drop off in our numbers means that our economy was even stronger than we thought. So strong that essentially the first 10 weeks of the year, which were 10 weeks being held during a strong economy, were still enough to outweigh the two terrible weeks at the end of the first quarter. It's that would surprise a lot of people, but it's an interesting fact. However, the second quarter is going to be brutal. The second quarter, April, May, and June, we anticipate the economy will contract by 30%. Now, we won't be able to look at those numbers and see it with our own eyes until we get to July, because second quarter numbers aren't reported until July. So even though we haven't seen evidence of it yet, and frankly, the only thing we've seen evidence of is an economy even stronger than we forecast, it does not take a Rhodes Scholar to predict that by the time we get to July and see those numbers for the second quarter, we will be looking at a budget crisis that the city probably hasn't seen since the Great Depression. We will have gone from a surplus to a tens of millions of dollar deficit. So since we haven't seen it yet, but we know it's coming, how are we forecasting for this? Our team has looked at historical recessions and modeled based off of whether this is going to be a light recession, a terrible recession, something worse than a recession, heading toward a depression. All we can do right now is model and guess, because nobody knows how long this is going to last. And frankly, up until our most recent data, the economy was even stronger than we thought. Based on reasonable modeling that I think is conservative and smart on past recessions, we know that our deficit is going to be somewhere between $25 and $50 million. If what the country is entering into is something closer to a depression, then that number will be $50 million. If this recession is lighter than it could be, if it's not quite as bad as the Great Recession 10 years ago, well, then maybe it's only a $20 million deficit. Right now, we're going on models and guesses, and that's what everyone has to do until we see the first tangible evidence of how much pain has been caused. And that tangible evidence still isn't going to come until the quarter is over. So our modeling has the deficit somewhere between 25 and 50. And again, we've already taken some action to soften the impact. The TELs have saved money in the budget. There are other programs and contracts that we were going to move forward on that we have decided not to, that have helped the budget. This $8 million that I believe is going to pass the legislature today will help. There will be more behind that. Our guess is that if they follow the same formula, potentially $22 to $23 million. Frankly, if the economic situation in our country ends up being at the low end of our modeling, those savings alone get us pretty close to digging out of our hole. But if those receipts, when we see them in July, indicate that we are headed towards something closer to a depression, well, then we're going to have a bigger hole to fill. And
Okay.
So long answer, I know, but that's how I answer.
That answers it. The second one I have is interesting when you talk about the strike response team that you're putting together with Toledo Police and the Health Department. You mentioned that we have the highest death rate in the state, and yet we're not the largest county. Is there just sort of what I'm getting from you is just sort of this look, we're not messing around here kind of attitude when it comes to either you follow the rules or you don't. We've got to clamp down here in our area because we have such a high death rate.
I think that's right. I think you diagnosed my attitude pretty accurately. Look, I want the world to go back how it was. Trust me. The world in Toledo, Ohio in February wasn't a perfect place, but it was, we had some momentum. There were some good things happening. Nobody wants to be where we are. Nobody caused it. There was no decision anyone made that put us in this crisis. And it's not just happening to Toledo, it's happening to every community in this country. So I want the economy to open back up. I want to be able, to go to restaurants, and I want there to be fireworks this year. I want there to be mud hen games. That's what I want. However, I know that some of that stuff we're just not going to be able to do this year. We're not going to be able to have fireworks, not because we don't want to, but because it's unsafe to do so. I want people to be able to shop at the retail store of their choice on May 12th. I do. But I worry, as do somewhere between 3/5 and 2/3 of the community, that if we do it, if we reopen the economy carelessly, if we reopen the economy without an eye toward reasonable restrictions that the governor has outlined, then we will be right back at square one and all of our hard work will have been lost. It is significant that we lead the state in COVID-19 deaths. We're not the biggest county. I think we're the 6th biggest county, 4th biggest city, 6th largest county, but yet we lead the state in deaths. And perhaps some of that has to do with our closeness to Michigan and what's happening in Detroit. I don't know. But this is serious stuff. And there are more people in this community frightened that things are opening up too quickly than there are citizens, protesting at the State House saying that, that Amy Acton should be impeached or whatever they're saying. We have to be mindful that people are scared, and this is still a serious threat. So look, let's do retail May 12th. Let's do it. Let's go. Let's buy stuff. That'd be wonderful for all of us, for the economy. But let's make sure that we're staying socially distanced from each other. Let's make sure those employees are wearing masks. Let's make sure there's signage at those stores. This isn't a time to be cutting corners. This isn't a time to look for creative ways. This is a big deal, and we're taking it seriously. And we have a team that is going to make spot checks and to follow complaints. And if we find evidence that they are trying to get around the governor's order, we'll close them down. We've already closed down 100 such businesses that previously had tried to get around the governor's orders. We don't want to do that. We don't want any of this to be happening. But we have to do what is in the best interest of the public health of our citizens.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor, the next question is from Sarah Elms at the Blade.
Hi, Mayor.
Hey.
This is a budget-related question as well. Councilwoman Katie Moline on Tuesday during council's meeting brought up those figures from the Brookings Institute that I know that you have spoken about before, Toledo being the fourth most fiscally impacted city in the country during this coronavirus crisis. And she said that the cuts so far the city has made only equate to $5 million when the city possibly needs, to fill a $50 million hole. And she asked city council members, do you feel like we're acting as if we are the fourth most impacted city in the country? So I'm curious to hear if you think, you guys are acting aggressively enough when it comes to the budget.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question. We were among the first cities. We were not the very first, but we were among the first cities to extend TELs to our workforce. I may be wrong, but I believe the city of Cleveland still hasn't taken that step. I could be wrong on that, but I believe that is the case. We were, I think, the third city in the state to take a pretty aggressive posture in that regard. And that, that's significant. It's not only saved a lot of money, but it's just what we have to do in the new reality. There are, and maybe it's my fault for not, announcing each one of the cuts as I've done it, but there are hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of contracts and programs that we had intended to introduce to council because in a different budget time, they were something that everyone wanted to do, that I just unilaterally decided to crumple up and throw away. Understanding that when it got to council, they weren't going to go for it. Now, maybe I should have pushed each one of those and let council vote it down, but that seems like a silly exercise. Ignacio, what is the name of that company that did that social?
Zen City.
Zen City. Okay, it's not the only example, but only because Ignacio is sitting right next to me. There's a company called Zen City. Can't remember how big that contract was, maybe 40,000. I mean, it was tens of thousands of dollars. We were going to move forward on a contract with this company. They essentially monitor social media postings and help cities focus resources where social media chatter seems to indicate that there could be, this neighborhood seems like it's having problems with crime, or social media. Again, I'm not a technical junkie, so I don't quite understand exactly what they would have done, but we were prepared to move. That is one that, that's one of the hundreds of thousands of dollars of contracts that we didn't even bother sending to council because we made the judgment that that was not a priority right now. I suppose maybe if we had sent it to council and let them vote no, they would have, I don't know, felt better that they were making more cuts. I'm not sure. I don't know how to respond to those comments. There's no question that we have been, that there are hundreds of thousands of dollars of costs that we have unilaterally cut even before sending to council because we knew that the administration felt that this was not the right time to move forward on those. And beyond that, we were among the first in the state to do TELs. We are I guess I don't know how I'd react to that other than to say, look, we're open for ideas. We've led the way on cuts. I don't know, but we've led the way on cuts. So anyhow, that's everyone has a different perspective, but it's difficult to believe that anyone could seriously think that we have not made some really serious cuts. And so we'll continue to make them, and we're going to continue to work with our team in Washington and Columbus to make sure that we're not forgetting about the other side of the ledger. You know, we don't, I think the point was made that we have to cut $1 million a week to survive 2020. That's not true at all. We might, again, in the worst case scenario, under the Great Depression scenario, it would be $1 million a week, but that's not $1 million of cuts. It's $1 million, it's $1 million per week budget problem, but that doesn't mean they all have to be cuts. I think that is also irresponsible. We have to fill a $50 million budget hole, or $25 to $50 million budget hole, depending on how bad this economic crisis turns out to be. But it's wrong to say that that means we have to cut that much. That's not true at all. We have to fill that budget hole, but there's two sides of the ledger. And my sense is that council maybe didn't know about the $8 million that's on its way, or the $22 million that will be on its way after that. But we have to cut more, and we've led on that. But it is irresponsible and short-sighted to say that all we have to do is cut. I don't know. I still believe in Toledo. I'm not ready to give up on Toledo. Right now, we're facing some tough times, but we're not dead. We do have to scale back, but we don't have to give up. There are still things that we can do to build on the momentum that we had. Frankly, we will recover from this crisis sooner if we continue to build and dare to do great things. You know, I don't know. So, and that is that's the basis of the conversation that we need to have with City Council right now. Again, on half a dozen different things that maybe we would not have decided to do if the program began today. But we started these things 6 months ago, 9 months ago. LED lights, you know, there's going to be a cost to the city of that. We could cut it, you know. Now, unlike the Zen City contract, which I unilaterally said we're just not doing that. LED lights is something that we'll probably bring to City Council, because I might have an opinion, but council has an opinion also. Okay, I think we should still do that. I think, you know, it doesn't take a lot of vision to cut. You know, you can take an axe and cut everything. You know, leadership involves building consensus around what your priorities are. And, you know, like the old saying is, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. This is why meteorologists always think that Snowmageddon is coming, when in reality we only get a half an inch. It's because this is their world. They view everything through the lens of meteor. I get it. A hammer sees everything as a nail. I suppose a CPA sees everything as an opportunity to cut, but that's not what leadership calls for. Leadership calls for building consensus around things we value. Anyone can take an axe or a scalpel and just start cutting stuff. That's not hard to do. But leadership in growing a city involves uniting around things that we still can do. And we'll get there. But that's how I'd answer that. I mean, we've led the state in cuts. Any serious person understands that.
Thank you.
Okay, it doesn't look like there's any more questions. That sounds like I talked you all into submission. But thank you for joining us today. And I can tell you right now, we're going to have some other pretty big announcements next Thursday that I think you and the citizens will be actually excited about. There were some rough announcements today, but we might have some good news next Thursday. So thank you, stay safe and healthy, and we'll talk to you soon.